Hey guys, so welcome back to the Negozju Podcast. It's been a few years since I've done one of these, but glad to be doing them once again. The whole goal with this podcast is to bring and shine a light on entrepreneurship in Malta, one of the amazing startups and entrepreneurs that are based here and have done amazing things. Recently, I've also announced that I'm running for politics in Malta. There also, my goal is to bring the concept of efficient government, of innovation, into the mindset of Maltese and people who are looking at the country. And today I'm really excited to be connecting here with Jacob Appel, who is very well known, at least for the work he's done in Malta. He was one of the founders of TimeToEat, one of the first food delivery platform in the island. Today we're all very comfortable getting our food with delivery through applications like Bolt, which he also happens to be one of the founders of. And I'm so excited about his next venture that he's been working on already for 4 or 5 years. It's called Binderr, and I personally believe that startup is going to have huge impacts to the Maltese economy. But we'll get started with getting to know all about him, his life story, what got him to Malta, and so would you like to maybe tell us why you chose to come to Malta 15 years ago and how things have been going since then?
Thanks, Luca.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Denmark, and I moved to Malta 16, 17 years ago. Really more as like a coincidence. I had a friend's father who was building up a poker company in Malta, and I was a poker player back then. I was studying law, I was playing poker, I was really tired of studying. So when my friend got wind of me being open to doing something else, then they asked me if I wanted to come down to Malta for 6 months, do some work on the startup. 6 months, I was gonna come down for 6 months, I think I told my parents, like, I'll go down there for 6 months, I'll have a great experience, and then I'll come back and continue studying. At that point, I had already dropped in and out of every single university degree that you could back home, and it was probably a sign that maybe that wasn't the path for me. I think it was more just like expectations from your parents and your surroundings that you were supposed to go through a university degree, and I always really struggled to get through it. I didn't. Like when something is such it's almost like you're trying to bicycle against the wind, and it's just like it's uphill, and I convinced my parents that I should go down here for 6 months, and now we're here 16, 17 years later, a few companies later, and this is my base. I have my family here, I have a beautiful fiance and 2 kids, living in a little town of Gargua. So it's been transformative for me to discover Malta.
Amazing. So it's become like a home for you.
Yeah, for sure. Although I haven't, throughout these 16, 17 years, it hasn't been the only place I've been living. It's been my base ever since. I spent some years out in Cyprus and in Tunisia and in the Middle East building out our businesses, but Malta was always like my base and my home throughout that period.
And obviously, when you arrived here, you were new to Malta, so your opinion and your perspective would have been kind of brand new. But how would you compare Malta from when you arrived to today?
So when I think about when I arrived, it's like a kid in a candy store. It's just like the weather, just that smell you get when you get out of the plane. There's just like this. It's funny, still after all these years, it still feels like a holiday to me. Every day I wake up and it's like I'm on a little sunny island in the Mediterranean. Like what could be better than that? And it's funny because a lot of Maltese people, they would ask me, why are you here? You're from Denmark. Like, Denmark is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It's so well organized. You have everything that you can imagine. Like, what are you doing in Malta? And I think it's more just like the grass is always green on the other side. I grew up in Denmark. To me, although Denmark's a beautiful place, I associate Denmark with like really just like this hamster wheel of everyday life, 9 to 5, going to the supermarket at 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the rain and the darkness, and everyone's just miserable. That's some of the feelings that I get when I think back about living in Denmark. And to me, Malta is like a haven of just good times, good weather. So yeah, that's probably just like a personal thing.
And like when you arrived in Malta, you started out doing some work in the poker industry, and you said that you were actually a law student, but you decided to go into entrepreneurship. And then eventually you created 2 more companies, TimeToEat and Bolt, both of them solving problems. So do you think that kind of entrepreneurship was inside of you, or how did it actually result in you starting different companies, and why did you go into poker and then shift into food delivery, for example?
Yeah, I think by chance. I don't come from an entrepreneurial family. Like, I come from a family where my father had a lot of success in the business world, but in large corporations. So that was sort of more what was expected, becoming an engineer or a lawyer and then doing the corporate ladder. When I came down to Malta, it was because I got involved in this poker company, and this poker company was founded by my friend's father. Now, they were 3 co-founders, all gentlemen in their late 40s, early 50s, and they had made a lot of money 5 years prior, building the poker platform that Betfair eventually acquired. Now, they made a ton of money. In 3-4 years, they blew it all. These were like old school players that had gotten the timing spot on with the poker boom, built a somewhat working platform, really sort of just had the whole, they really sort of had the wind in their backs because of the surge that was in poker hobbyists and poker players around the world. Had a fantastic exit to Betfair. I think they sold it for like 25 million or something like that, but ended up basically blowing it all. They were buying fancy apartments, going to God knows what kind of places and having a good time. And then at some point when they were about to run out of money, they came to Malta to have another go at building another poker platform, because they were realizing that we need to have a second act, otherwise we're going to go broke. And with their last money, I think they invested like 2-3 million euros. The problem was at that point they weren't geared for what it took to build another. Like, they had worked hard back then, I'm sure, but a lot of it was timing related. When I joined that company, it was in the midst of full tip poker stars, all the big players had already been established in the market, and we were trying to build a poker network from scratch. And with the resources, even just with the talent that we had in the company, it wasn't sufficient. But for me personally, it was a huge learning curve, because you had the 3 owners of the business more focused on having a good time than running the business. And because I took a lot of responsibility when I joined, I had a poker background in the sense that I really love playing poker, but also like whatever chance I had at gaining some additional responsibility, I just threw myself at it. It was just like, I love to get involved, and within long I was suddenly running this 20-odd person company, the operations of it, half the development side, because it was me thinking out the features and whatnot. So that was just like sheer luck that I found myself in this situation, and all of a sudden I just get to sort of run a startup that had millions of euros in investment, that has teams. We ultimately failed and didn't go anywhere, but just the experience, right, was massive when you're 21, 22 years old. Like, I wish everyone could have that experience at that age, because it's so formative.
Me too. In fact, that's why I feel really passionate about having more startups in Malta, because I feel like, especially young people today, when they're in a startup environment, they feel a lot more connected to what they're doing. They can get a lot more life lessons from it. But you also mentioned timing as an important part of starting a business. So did you take that lesson forward when you were moving to your next venture?
I don't know if I took it forward. I think even the next one, the next company was TimeToEat, and that again, it wasn't.
Which I remember actually being maybe 17, 18 years old. It was the thing we used to use always, that maybe 1, 2 in the morning at a friend's house playing PlayStation to get some food from Luke's. That was one we used to order from very often. So it was for me at least, that was my first e-commerce experience in Malta as a local, really, that one where it's kind of fully integrated with food and delivery.
Yeah, no, it's funny because TimeToEat wasn't a huge company, right? But like it had this impact in Malta because it was sort of like the first wave of e-commerce apps.
There was a famous ad, I think, with Sarah Zarafa, that everyone used to write memes about.
No, it's still fun. Like still when I go out to eat sometimes in restaurants in the small villages, like they'll remember me, like, you're Jacob on TimeToEat. No, so the timing, I think, it was my co-founder who came to me and was like, because the poker company had gone bust, and I was in this place where do I move back to Denmark or do I stay in Malta? And in that period, he came to me and he's like, why don't we build this startup together, right? We were both from Denmark. We could see the success that Just Eat was having in Denmark, and we were always struggling to order takeaway here. Because we would call up the restaurants in Malta and just trying to like explain the street address to a pizzeria here was an experience, and caused a lot of funny.
That's interesting, because I think most people think like when you start a startup, everything's got to be perfect from day one. But you're actually talking about, figuring out how to get the pizza guy to find the street address. Yeah. That was a manual process in the start.
I think that was just that was like we should make it easier, right? And we didn't have to invent the wheel or anything. Like we just knew that there's this concept, Just Eat in Denmark. It's working. It's getting massive traction. If it works in Denmark and we're struggling here in Malta, like, why not go for that? And yeah, then we just started building. We hired a Ukrainian developer and we started building. This was sometime end of 2012. I think early 2013 we launched. I spent the first couple of months just trying to convince the restaurant to join the thing. And back then, it was not a known concept that restaurants would pay a commission to you on the orders that you would send them, which now is like, why would anyone not go for that? Like it's all upside. You pay nothing to list on this website. You only pay when we give you business. It seems like a no-brainer. Back then it was like we were trying to.
So there was a lot of education that needs to go down.
So that took a lot of effort convincing the first restaurants. Also the fact that you could pay with credit card online, because then it was like we would receive the money and then we would have to send the money to the restaurants.
Yeah.
Which is also like a huge trust thing for them initially. Like there's this 23-year-old guy coming to tell me he's gonna pay me later. I just need to prepare food and send it out to his customers, and then he's gonna come pay me. Yeah. That required some convincing. Yeah, so I don't. It wasn't like it wasn't this really well thought out master plan that we had. It was literally just a personal problem that we had and we could see.
This is normal, right? To get ideas from abroad and then to figure out how to make them work in Malta, and that's a big part of innovation. So I think that's a valuable thing that people can kind of learn, right? Is that they can get experiences abroad, and if it works somewhere else, why can't it work here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people will obviously sometimes say, "Oh no, it can never work for Malta," but you actually challenge that and say, "Yo, it can."
Yeah, no, I think Malta is one of the greatest test beds for these types of platforms. We could even see when we did the ride-hailing Bolt or Taxify back then. The adoption in Malta is phenomenal. If we compare to, we started a bunch of businesses in Cyprus as well, right? And
I'm more interested about Tunisia actually, because I've been there, I've used Bolt in Tunisia, and I was like surprised that they had it.
Yeah.
And it was actually with cash.
That's an interesting story. But just to go back to the point around like Malta in terms of like a place of adoption, is really like the people here are hungry and keen, and they are willing to adopt technology if it's available to them. There we can see in Cyprus that the adoption is much slower, both when we did the food companies, when we did the taxi companies. We've had a much slower adoption in Cyprus than we
like this rhetoric I like, you know, where we're thinking, you're saying the Maltese are actually ready to adopt new technology, they're ready to try new things. And I think sometimes people assume the opposite.
And part of this is also because the Maltese islands have turned into a very international place, right? Where you are getting all this inspiration from all these different cultures, and people have become more open-minded, where as much as I love Cyprus, it's still more of a close-minded community and society because of all sorts of reasons. But in Malta, there's really this open-mindedness about new ideas and concepts you're bringing, at least from my experience.
So tell me about Tunisia. How did that go about? Because that's like a wild card in your experiences.
So at that point, I've stepped away from TimeToEat. We've started Bolt in Cyprus, and me and my partner Bambo can see that Cyprus is going to be amazing, but we need more time. So we had found some. We had two guys in Cyprus that were going to take over the Cypriot operation, and then we wanted to go and expand further. And we had spent a bunch of time out in Crete, in Greece, and we had gotten a local taxi company to partner with us, and we were going to move out there. I think we'd already found an apartment we were going to live in while we were building it up out there. And the night before we fly to Crete, a friend of ours calls and is like, guys, you should go check out Tunisia, because Tunisia is it's a much bigger market, and we think that would be a great opportunity. We ended up cancelling our flights to Crete, not moved to Crete, we flew to Tunisia instead, and then we didn't leave Tunisia for like 2 years. When we launched in Tunisia, it was so Tunisia is like, I think we called it yellow paradise, because it is just like a sea of yellow taxis. Everywhere you go, there's yellow taxis. But there was no way. You couldn't even call a taxi company to order a taxi. The only way to get a taxi was to go out on the street and then wait for a taxi to show up. But because everyone would be using taxis to get around, they would just be everywhere. So we go to Tunisia, and we need to, the first place you start is to go and convince taxi drivers that they should work with you. So, and there's so many taxi drivers in Tunisia. We have these, we set up, so the demand from the taxi drivers are huge. They are all looking for additional income, and they've heard about the Ubers, the Bolts of the world. And we rent an office in this fancy building where you have a bunch of like financial services company types of thing, and then we have one at the top floor of this building. And we would set up classes, 50 people a class, 3 times a day for like 2 hours to pitch, train, and get them onboarded onto the app. And this office building just turns into absolute mayhem. There's just like people in and out, and they ended up like suing us and like the whole thing because they would turn this office building upside down. But probably within 6 months, so in Cyprus we had been operating maybe 6 months at that point. And I think we're doing maybe like 200-300 rides a day. We launched in Tunisia, and I think within 6 months we're doing 10,000 a day. We are onboarding 2,000 drivers within the first couple of months. You can imagine trying to onboard 2,000 drivers in a couple of months. It's just, it was into chaos. And then in Tunisia we could not have credit card payments, which means everything's in cash. The taxi drivers didn't even have mobile phones, so we had to go and make a deal with the phone company in Tunisia where we bought hundreds of phones with subscriptions, and then we gave them out to all the drivers. And you know what happened after we gave them all the phones and the subscriptions? They would go and sell the phones to relatives and to friends.
Oh my God.
And no one would have phones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
so
you take the risk. You take the risk.
Yeah, yes, you do it. You of course, and some of it worked and whatnot. So at that point, it's just all about like trying to get this flywheel to spin. And then in Tunisia, there isn't online payments. No one has a credit card, which means everything's in cash. So the first obstacle was to convince these taxi drivers to come back, because now they were getting paid in the cars and they would have to come and pay us our commission. So initially we had to convince the taxi drivers to come in and pay us the commission, and it was like a ghost town, no one would show up. We were waiting for these thousands of drivers to come in and pay us, and just no one would show up. And we did all sorts of efforts to try and get that. Eventually we started blocking them all, and then the word got around. Your account will be blocked if you don't come and pay. And then we set up in this cafeteria to begin with, next to the office building. Because I think at that point, whoever owned the building had sort of put some rules in place. Taxi drivers are not allowed to go into the building anymore. So we rented out this cafeteria next door to the office building, and we would have drivers line up in a queue to hand us money for the commission. And we would end up like, pretty much like going to the bank with duffel bags from Tunisia.
Right.
So yeah, that was
that's a cool experience. That's a really cool experience. Which actually makes me think about, like you go out there, like you find a problem that needs to be solved, and you just go ahead and do it. And in fact, one of the reasons why I contacted you to interview today is because the current thing you're working on is a solution that I think is really, really, really Malta. To give like some background, I first encountered a problem in Malta when we didn't used to have Stripe accounts for many businesses. So I had registered a company in London before Brexit, and then I used that company to open Stripe accounts. And I set up in London simply because I could do it in 24 hours for £150. It was super easy. And then I started learning a bit more about digital nomads, and in Estonia they have something called the e-residency, which has been running for 10 years and does 10 to 15 billion in revenue, 250 million goes to the government, over 33,000 companies registered through this e-residency, which is something, 33,000, something like 20% of all Estonian companies. And I've been pushing for some time now this idea of an e-residency for Malta. But when I come across Binderr and I read what you guys are doing, it seems like that's what you're building for the country in some sense, but obviously as a private entity, from the private sector, you're bringing a solution, which is super exciting. But you actually started out targeting freelancers, right? And you didn't see that as a viable route?
Yes, exactly. We started out on the back of, so this 4 or 5 years ago, before we set the Bolt company, we're already aware at some point this is going to come to an end. Bolt is going to want to acquire the business back. We had the rights to operate in a bunch of countries. We were Malta, Cyprus, Tunisia at that point. Our plan originally was to go and expand it to rest of Africa, Middle East, and at some point they changed their mind. They were like, this is now part of our core strategy to run these markets ourselves. So you guys, you're left with Malta, Tunisia, and Cyprus, and that's it. And as soon as that, then like all my interest for Bolt just vanished because there was no more to build. We had already built what was possible, right? So at that moment, it was just like, okay, what are we going to do next? And the first idea we came up with was we had, I think at that point, I don't know what we had, maybe like 5,000 self-employed drivers and couriers working for us in Bolt. And we were like, a lot of these freelancers, self-employed people, they're coming to us to ask for tax advice, VAT, filing their VAT returns, and we can refer them to anyone how they should do it. And we're like, why don't we spin up like an accounting firm on the back of this where we will service all these 5,000 self-employed drivers and couriers. And initially we were just going to hire 5 accountants and start doing all this for them. Then that turned into, let's build an application for them. So they have an app, they can take pictures of their receipts, and then we can automatically populate the CFR VAT return here in Malta and get it submitted. And then that turned into, okay, maybe there's a bigger use case, because like this seems to be a problem globally, or at least in all of Europe from what we looked at. So we like just went head down building out this application. In hindsight, we should have done a bit more research, because we ended up spending like a year and a half, spending 150,000 a month building out this self-employed accounting app, to then realize that was an absolute terrible business.
Now, that was meant to be EU-wide.
Yes, but the first mistake is every tax framework in Europe is just so fragmented. It's like you're starting from scratch. So you build it from Malta, but then you can use a little bit of the core foundation, but all the integrations, all the VAT return, everything's from scratch as soon as you go to Cyprus or another country. So it wasn't scalable.
Yep.
2, charging 15-20 euros a month to self-employed people is also just a really difficult business model. Your top of funnel needs to be so insanely wide before you can make that profit. Self-employed, they churn a lot. Sometimes they're self-employed, sometimes they're employed. They don't really care about taxes. At least it's not always top of mind for them. So it's like So it's a very difficult business to scale. Now we have built some really good accounting technology to service these freelancers. So we were like, hey, why don't we go and sell that accounting technology to accountants instead? I even think in between that, we were like, let's sell it to businesses. Then we realized, okay, let's actually sell it to the accountants, because then every time you convince an accountant, at least you get like 100 businesses in one go, right? So then we went to the accountants and we were like, hey, we built this really innovative accounting tool. Would you be up for using it? And nothing. They were just like, guys, we love what you've built, but listen, our entire firm runs on Xero or QuickBooks or Sage, and like, unless you can give me this software for free, or unless you can automate all my work, then I'm just not going to change out this whole thing, because it requires incredible resources to change out this, like the amount of training, the amount of even risk. Like, imagine that Binderr doesn't work out, now their whole accounting firms is using this software. So it's like the endless number of reasons why they were not going to just shift out their existing accounting provider. It was clear in those conversations that they were very happy to talk about anything that was like adjacent to the accounting part of it. So if we wanted to talk about compliance, client onboarding, corporate, CRM, you name it, their game. So then it's like, okay, so accountants, they have issues. It's not around the accounting, but there's all these other areas where they are struggling. And then we started building up this corporate product. So in Malta, for anyone who doesn't know, it is basically every company and corporation, as in many international finance centers, all goes through corporate service providers. So today they would do these company and corporations pretty much manually. So they would draft all the documents manually, they would send them for signature manually, and then they would file them with the business registry. A lot of the law firms in Malta used to have a taxi driver employed to run documents to the business registry.
Correct.
So that's how manual.
I think it's still
some still have drivers employed for this. So that was like, okay, maybe there's something there. And at the same time, an old friend of ours contacted us who has his own CSP and was like, we've been thinking about building out this product, if that's something that Binderr could be interested in helping out with. Initially, we were building it as part of the accounting app, and very quickly we took that accounting software, we spent 2 million euros or however much building, and we threw it in the bin and we started working on the corporate module. Then we built out the corporate module, we launched that, and it's a really cool software. Like you can go and you can change the director in 10 seconds, it updates, registers, it sends the resolutions to the directors, it sends the documents to the business registry, and everything's just like very beautiful. Again, we were facing the problem. it's not very scalable. Because every single business registry in the world needs a specific integration. This is not streamline. And there I had fooled myself to saying, but the corporate product in of itself is fairly scalable because a share transfer technically works the same no matter if you're in the UK, you're in Malta, you're in Cyprus. Fundamentally, it's a share transfer agreement, it's some forms that needs to go to the business registry, and it's some resolutions that need signed, more or less. But it's just not that simple. It still requires a lot of tweaking, a lot of customizing. So it wasn't the most scalable product either. So once again, we had found ourselves spending a whole year this time, I think. At least we say it wasn't a year and a half, but maybe a good year, building out a whole corporate platform. And again, we found that there's something, this is cool, this software, people are paying us for it, but it's very difficult to take over the world with this software. So then, and we had always, back then, I swore, we are going to stay hyper-focused. We do one thing and we do it right. But it was like every single customer we spoke to was like, they were using the corporate product, they were excited about what it can do. But the corporate product without the whole compliance, because when you incorporate a company on behalf of a client, you need to do KYC on them.
Yeah.
And that they were doing manually. So you had this whole manual process, then you had a little bit of automation with Binderr, and then you went back to a bunch of different processes.
Print this and sign that. Yes.
And we're like, okay, we're gonna have to figure this first part out with the onboarding. And we started building out that. And that we got insanely excited about, because that was the first time that we actually built out a product that was super scalable. So the KYC, KYB platform we have today, out of the box, works in pretty much any jurisdiction in the world. It also works across sectors. So we have banks, EMIs, real estate, law firms, accounting firms, corporate service providers, wealth managers, a bunch of different industries using the exact same software. So very scalable, both geographically but also sector-wise. Now, once we had done that, we then realized so this is like, if I had to give one lesson to an aspiring entrepreneur, it would be, do your homework. Don't do what I did, where you're just like, this seems like a great idea. Let's spend a year and a half down some rabbit holes and then realize it's not there. Now that doesn't mean you're going to realize like whatever idea you come up with, you're going to have to adjust and you're going to have to pivot. But don't spend like I spent 4 years, 0 revenue, 150 grand a month, down the drain. So there, be a little bit more mindful about how you go about it. Don't hire too early. Stay very lean until that you know that you have the right sweet spot. Go out, sell the product before that you actually build it. Don't like spend a year and a half building it and then try and go out and sell it.
Let's put this all together for whoever is listening. The platform itself, essentially, it allows the person to go into KYC, to go under due diligence.
Yeah, so what we do today is we sell this software to mainly professional services, so accounting firms, law firms, corporate service providers, and they use that to first obtain information from their clients. So you probably experience receiving a PDF from your bank or from your lawyer that needs a bunch of information for you.
Yeah.
Once you've completed that information, a bunch of things happen in the background, right? Once they receive that PDF from you, then they need all that information into different systems.
Yes.
And that's what Binderr really does for you. So we have the ability to build these custom onboarding forms. So when Luca, he receives this onboarding form and he completes it, all that data goes into all the right places in the service provider system. So it will run background checks, screening checks on you. It will take all the information that you gave it, put it into a risk assessment, come out with a risk score. So it just automates all like the back-end work for these service providers.
And normally as an entrepreneur, you are doing this once to open a bank account, once to open your company, once to register with the payment platform.
So that was the next eye-opener. That was like, so today every single AML, KYC, KYB software in the world, they attack the problem the exact same way. They go to the bank or to the law firm and they give them the technology. how we see it is that it's not enough to supply the technology to the regulated firm. You need to give the technology to the end user, because otherwise the end user is going to have to go through that same flow every single time. And we, especially like as entrepreneurs or business owners that require multiple services, the time that we spend on doing onboarding forms for banks, auditors, lawyers, accountants, corporate service providers, insurance in multiple countries is incredible, right? So what we're building is, so we have this compliance risk engine that we supply to the regulated firms, and on top of that we're building a marketplace where you and I as business owners, we can get our own free KYC wallet. We go through Binderr's due diligence process once. So you give your identity verification, your proof of address, social wealth, whatnot. And then Binderr's replicating thousands of onboarding forms from law firms, accounting firms, banks, so that you, as Luca or Luca Limited, can sign up, go through due diligence once, and then onboard with any financial institution, any service providers globally. So you, with the click of a button, eventually you can open a bank account in Singapore or engage a lawyer in Estonia.
So let's say, put it in perspective as well for maybe a 21-year-old entrepreneur. How can this help him?
So when I started my first business, and this is the process that most of us go through, we're like, where do we start? Okay, we need a company. Who do we go to? We ask our parents, we ask a friend, do you know anyone who can help me set up my company? They will then refer us to someone. Of course, that person has not done thorough research on what the market looks like, whether that person that they refer to you is actually the best suited person for that job that you need done. So the marketplace really enables more transparency into the industry, where it's like, okay, if you need a company to help you incorporate, then you go onto this marketplace, you can see all the different CSPs in Malta that does company incorporations. You can get an indication of the price of the incorporation or what they specialize in. So maybe if you're a tech startup, then you find a CSP that has a focus on tech startups. But that's just the first step, right? Then once you've incorporated your company, now you need a bank account. Again, you go through the same process. You ask your parents, you ask your friend, or you ask your newly found corporate service provider if he knows any banks. Again, of course, he hasn't researched the entire market of what banks and EMIs that are available to you. In fact, we've been in this space for so long, and still to this day, it sort of feels like, in being a Maltese entrepreneur, bank accounts are like gold. They're so difficult to get a hold of. Like, if anyone ever offers us a bank account, we take it right away. We're like, yes, please. Because we're always afraid that someone will shut us down because we're running out of Malta, and Malta is considered a high-risk jurisdiction in many locations. So we're always exposed to having our accounts frozen and then needing another bank provider. Now, building out this marketplace showed us how many banks and EMIs that are actually willing to work with you, but you don't have that information at hand, and no one knows. It's only like, imagine that you need you're setting up a new company in Malta and you need a bank account. You can either, you've heard about a bank that's good to bank with, or
someone recommends to talk to this manager, and
you want to go onto a marketplace, you want to see all the banks, all the EMIs that are willing to work with you, what is their pricing, what do they offer, and then you don't want to have to go through the due diligence process. You want to go through the due diligence. You've already done the due diligence process once, you don't want to do it once.
So both as somebody who's new as a young Maltese entrepreneur, but also someone who's new to the country, this demystifies a lot of maybe the common pitfalls that a lot of entrepreneurs go through.
But even for established business,
sometimes legal fees can go up, can rake up a lot of costs. And if you're a new business, that's sunk costs before you even got started.
No, it's exactly right. There are firms that are better suited for you for depending on the stage you are at as a company or the type of company that you are. So just finding the right match. At the moment, we do exactly like how we used to order takeaway 10 years ago.
Yes.
We used to have a Chinese takeaway and a pizzeria brochure in our kitchen drawer, and we used to pull those out once a month, and we called one of them. Then Uber Eats and the Bolts, they launched, and suddenly the whole world of takeaway was open to us. And what happened was that we went from ordering takeaway once a month to ordering takeaway twice a month, once a week.
I guess you can even see like how the market changes, right? When you first started to take the food business, the quality of the food available on the platform maybe wasn't the best. But then over time, people actually started tailoring their business towards where people are paying. So if people are buying online, then the service you were getting at home was getting better and better.
Exactly. And
so you're almost, you're defining the future of the market, and then it's up to the CSPs to adopt tech. And
you're making it more accessible. The problem back then with the restaurants was that they weren't that accessible to you. Once you make them accessible, it's like everyone wins. For example, today, I have an account with Wise where there's 200,000 euros in it, for example. They're just sitting in that account bearing 0% interest. Wise doesn't give me any money on that 200k I say. I know that there are banks out there that are willing to pay 5% interest on my 200k deposit. Why am I not switching? Because one, I have to go and do a bunch of research myself. I have to Google up what banks can give me a fixed deposit interest. Then I find 2 banks. Then I have to start an onboarding process. One, I don't even know how credible, reliable they are. Then I have to go through an onboarding process with them. I don't know if the onboarding process takes 2 days. I don't know if it takes a month. I might go through a whole month of onboarding to then find I'm rejected. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to leave my 200,000 in Wise because they're sitting comfortably there. Now, that means that the switching cost is too high. Now imagine that inside Binderr, you can, by the click of a button, open an account with a provider that's willing to give you 5% interest. That is, it's thing. We use the same lawyer over and over again because the switching cost is too high. We stay with the same bank account even though that banking partner is not necessarily the best suited for you because the switching cost is too high. So the marketplace will just, it will make it more accessible, and it will create a bunch of value for the business owners.
And is Binderr going to be Malta focused, or is it going to be global? You'll have more jurisdictions.
Global. So today we have people in Malta, Cyprus, Dubai, Channel Islands, UK, Luxembourg. We are very focused on the international finance centers, what we used to call offshore jurisdictions. And that is because that they often deal with, so Binderr as a KYC, KYB platform really excels when it comes to corporate onboardings.
Yeah.
So we handle like international complex structures really well and onboarding those complex structures. So just because of that, we also have a more, on the marketplace side, a more corporate and then a more offshore focus initially. But eventually, I see Binderr as the place where every bank account, every lawyer, every accountant is engaged with. Because you go through the KYC process once, and then everything is just at your disposal from that point.
And if we had to say, let's say, to anyone who's watching in government, for example, if there were some changes that could help make Malta the perfect jurisdiction for something like this, what would you do?
I think as an entrepreneur, what attracts me about doing business in a jurisdiction is the ease of setting up. It is the access to banking services. So can I get a good bank account with a trustworthy banking partner? Can I get access to finance? Is there loans available? Is there grants available? And they actually think that Malta, we have gotten a loan from partly sponsored by the Malta Development Bank through BOE, for example, which has been a really big supporter of what we're doing at Binderr. Malta Enterprise has a load of grants available to entrepreneurs starting out. So I actually think on that front that we're fairly well covered. I think in terms of like company corporations, it could be better in terms of banking opportunities. There's definitely room for improvement. there is a lot of EMIs, new banks entering the market, which is really helping up and making it at least more, like as I said before, like we've been doing this for a long time and we still feel like bank accounts were like gold. Bank accounts are not supposed to feel like gold. They're supposed to be very accessible and available to people that are trying to do business, right? So I would focus on making it really accessible with initiatives like they're doing in Estonia with the e-residency. Like I have an e-residency in Estonia. I have a company in Estonia that is fully incorporated through that e-residency. There it's still a bit crazy that we are like sending documents across the world, like it's the 1700s with like pigeon carriers, and then like we have a director over there and UBO in Sweden that needs to sign, and then it all needs to come back to Malta and get filed with the registry. They are making that a little bit. You told me before we started talking about your experience in terms of having an investor ready to...
Correct. My last company, it was essentially I raised capital from a foreign investor. Terms agreed, everything's agreed, but then the process of incorporating, assigning the shares, doing the transfer of the shares, the due diligence of the investors, all of those together took up to 9 months for me, and the investment eventually got halved. I still received an investment, but it was half of what I was expecting. So obviously, as a startup, that cuts your runway quite a bit, and eventually I shut down that company where I was employing 15 people in Malta. So definitely for me, I really want to try to figure out how we can make things like share transfers faster, more cost efficient. The cost of incorporation, I believe, needs to go down because if you're an entrepreneur in Malta and you're 21 years old, you're more likely going to be working as a self-employed person because it's much easier to set up. But then obviously you're going to take much less risks because you're liable for everything in that sense. And I mean, when you look at jurisdictions like London, where you can just set up in 24 hours, I think it needs to be faster. It needs to be less of an investment to set up a company because then you will have more people starting companies. So for me, seeing something like Binderr, which is aiming to make that process more efficient, is very exciting. So even trying to understand what blockers does the country's infrastructure have that need to be solved. And I know there's a lot of amazing work being done by the MBR and the FSA and these entities in Malta, but maybe sometimes they're not given enough kind of political attention or enough support from people, because when you're talking about due diligence and share transfers, it sounds a bit boring, right? So it's not really stuff that people campaign on. But I think most people, if they understood the economics behind that, they would be like, yes, please.
Yes, for sure. Like it is such a catalyst of economic growth, making the country accessible for business. So 100% support that.
That's it. I've told you before, I think people like yourself, I compare to the modern day Knights of Malta. Let me tell you why. Because, in the past, Malta used to have a lot of foreigners here forever, and the Knights of Malta were always, very, kind of ambitious people from all over Europe who would come here, and they built the infrastructure of the country in the 1500s. They built the Valletta, the bastions, they built fortifications, and I think like some of the work we're doing can be compared to building our digital infrastructure. So maybe you're not building castles, but you're building digital castles in that sense.
Thank you. That must be the nicest comparison.
It's going to take a lot. But it's exciting stuff. Yeah. Anything that maybe a word of advice to anyone who's starting up or who's got an ambitious idea and they want to make it happen?
Definitely what I mentioned earlier around learning from some of the mistakes that I did, where because I was coming from a place of just wanting to start a business, it's not all, like it typically works out better when you have when you are aware that you want to start a business, but you're not just throwing yourself at it without having done the homework, because then you'll end up doing what I did, spending 4 years in a rabbit hole, spending God knows how much money. There I would be a little bit more diligent in terms of actually go out, prove that there's a market. Now you're not going to get it right from the beginning, but go out before you've built anything with
A thesis.
a screenshot
Yes.
of what you intend to build and speak to your customers and see if they're ready to buy. Ideally even get them